Senator from Washington.
As if in legislative session, notwithstanding the provisions of Rule 22, I ask unanimous consent that the Committee on Veteran Affairs be discharged from further consideration of S. 2801, the Veterans, Families, Health Services Act of 2023, and the Senate proceed to its immediate consideration. Further, that the bill be considered read a third time and passed, and the motion to reconsider be considered made and laid upon the table.
Is there objection?
Mr. President.
Senator from Oklahoma.
Reserving the right to object. I like most Americans, have friends that have loved ones. I know children that were born through IVF. I'm passionate about the value of every single child, and I'm grateful for every single child that we have in our nation and for their potential future. I have friends that are in the process right now of actually adopting embryos that were still frozen, that they could not have children of their own, and so they're adopting those embryos to make sure that they're able to come to life. IVF is not a controversial issue for me in that sense. We're passionate about it, as every state now protects that right and continues to be able to honor this. I understand it's become vogue in this current season right now to be able to say Republicans are somehow opposed to life because they're opposed to IVF. I just don't find that. But within this bill that's actually coming, this bill actually, part of it came through the Senate Armed Services Committee. That bill itself, when it came through, it's substantially similar to that. It tried to come to the NDAA and was not included in the NDAA. It had an objection. The CBO scored it somewhere around $1 billion a year. Now, this bill itself, I understand, doesn't have a CBO score because it includes not only that section that was $1 billion a year, but it actually includes another section that has not gone through the Senate Committee on Veterans Affairs. In fact, it was brought up in a previous Congress in the Senate Committee on Veterans Affairs, didn't have a hearing on it, nor a markup, and then during a Democrat-led Senate, and then a Democrat-led Senate as well, didn't even recently, this session, even have a markup on it. So in all of these issues, I look at it and say, this has not been fully vetted through what this actually is and what it actually does, nor the cost of it, much less to be able to have 24 hours later, it try to come for unanimous consent. This bill itself includes some overly broad definitions that I think need some conversation about. Quite frankly, we in the Senate, this is what we're supposed to do. It includes things like assisted reproductive technology, fertility treatments. It leaves the door open for future definitions for gene editing or for cloning, and leaves those to the discretion of the Secretary, whoever the Secretary may be in the future. The bill's definition of infertility includes the inability to reproduce or safely can carry a pregnancy to term. It's a very broad term, trying to be able to figure out what that means. Obviously, that means everyone who's not a woman as well would be included in that. The bill also expands the eligibility to partners who do not have to be TRICARE beneficiaries. This would be the first time that DOD would be required to provide medical care to someone who's not otherwise entitled by virtue of their relationship to the military in other ways. This breaks new ground in that area. So there's not only issues of questions of definitions and such, but there's also just definition of cost or working through the committee process through committees that have so far either not passed it or have refused to even have a markup or a hearing on it. So I don't think it's good for us to be able to bring this for unanimous consent to be able to move it this time. Let's move it through in a broader conversation, but I would also encourage, just as a body, I don't find Republicans that are just broadly opposed to IVF. And I know this is a broad part of the conversation right now to leave that implication after what happened in Alabama. But I am a Republican that's passionate about the value of every single child that also doesn't have an issue with IVF. I'm grateful to know people that have gone through the process and know their kids and know the value of every single one of those children. So for the sake of honoring life and for the sake of honoring obviously what we do as a Senate and how we function together, for those reasons, Mr. President, I object.
Mr. President.
The objection is heard.
Mr. President.
Senator from Washington.
Mr. President, I'm deeply disappointed, but not surprised. Let the record show I have been trying to pass this legislation into law for well over a decade. It wasn't yesterday, it wasn't last year, for well over a decade. And for the entire time, Republicans have been the ones who have blocked efforts to include this bill in any legislative package. I'd really hoped after the outpouring of public statements in support of IVF from my colleagues across the aisle, they might finally change their tune, but the American people understand that actions speak louder than words. On the unofficial CBO score that was mentioned, let's just say, I think it's a real overestimate of how many people with dealing with fertility would make use of IVF and other fertility services at that cost. And my understanding, it also adds the cost of children conceived through IVF being conceived or being covered on VA healthcare for the rest of their childhood, which doesn't make a lot of sense since many of those families will have children one way or the other anyway. So I dispute that, but I will say it's pretty clear Republicans do not support IVF despite their language, not even for wounded service members and for veterans. But having said that, Mr. President, my door is open. I am determined. If a member of our country goes overseas and is wounded and comes home and cannot conceive a family, we should be there to provide service for them. It is our promise to our veterans that when they serve us, we will take care of them when they get home. What is not more basic than making sure they can have a family after serving our country? So I'm disappointed once again, but Mr. President, I will not stop working on this. It's the right thing to do. Thank you. I yield the floor.